So, yeah. So, in this talk, I want to quickly go over some predicative possessive constructions across Iranian. And when you look at those constructions, there are many interesting and surprising aspects, such as the one just mentioned, that they're not used as locatives very often. But also, when you look at their actual syntax in typological functional lenses, there are some weird split constructions, as well as some development that have been recently called in the literature in the Walls Atlas, have drift, and so on. And it really creates a situation where from one mother construction, many daughter constructions kind of develop some peculiar syntactic structures. So what I'm going to do now is just give a quick and very dirty definition for what I mean by predicative possession, and really quickly go over the major typological types. Then I'm going to go over really quickly predicative possession in Old Persian and then in Bactrian, just because it's a nice case of losing case markers and what do you do then. And then I'm going to go over in more details into Middle Persian possession, and then I'm going to compare Talishi and Sivandi possession. So, just quick and dirty definitions. So I'm just following Langacker's definition from 93. He repeats it more or less in the same words in 95. Predicating an intimate or control relationship between a participant possessor and a primary nominal reference point, which is the possessed. So this definition ends up including many situations which are expressed by the English verb have, but also by the Turkish var or by Hebrew yesh, and so on and so on. And those include legal rights, such as have authority over someone, kin relationships, such as have a husband, have a wife, mental situations, such as have a headache, because you fly all night long and then you have a headache, and so on. And there are many articles and a book, actually, Heine 1997 is a book that go into great details there. Just to note that this definition collapses what people sometimes call alienable and inalienable possessive subtypes of possession into one category. Whether or not languages actually end up differentiating them using some different grammatical mechanisms is beside the point for now. And this definition, again, is functional or semantic in nature, and it does not assume that the language has a single unique construction to express possession, or that predicative possession constructions need to express only possession. So going over some major typological types, there is the famous, what Heine calls the genitive existential possession schema, which is common in Turkic and is found in Turkish and Azeri. There is the goal existential schema, which is, I gave example here from Hebrew, where the possessor is marked as a goal, usually a benefactor, a benefactive or a recipient. There is the locative schema, which people have been mentioning here already, and I gave this from Mongolian because it is actually cited in the word atlas of language structures. And finally, there is the action or event schema, where you have something like a have verb, or which I gave him from Persian and English. I'm going to skip the. Okay, let's go over it. We have time, I think. So finally, we have the topic schema, where you have some sort of a topic marker on the possessor, and the possessor is repeated as an affix of the possessed. This is kind of rare, but as we will see, there are some Iranian languages which get very close to this construction. So the process of have drift, which we will feature towards the end of the talk, is a situation where you have a predicative possession construction with a be verb, like you have across all Iranian, but slowly the possessor is starting to have more and more syntactic, let's say, properties of A arguments or transitive subjects. The possessed element is starting to acquire more and more properties of P arguments or direct or primary objects. And the possessive marker or the copula acquires more verbal properties of a transitive verb. And this is a very gradual process. So as far as I am aware of, every time typologists identify this, they find it somewhere in flux. It's never complete. And we are going to see that in Sivandi, we can, I think, reasonably argue for the first and the third, but not for the second very much. We can skip that. So, in the general, what I call the general Iranian be become possessives, we're going to have three major variables. The first is the expression of the possessor, which across Iranian is going to be very unstable, and there's going to be many changes in it, basically due to the loss of or disintegration of the old case system. We're going to have the possessed, which is surprisingly stable across Iranian. It's basically almost always a nominative noun phrase. And we're going to have a verbal copula, which is usually going to just be the be verb, not the locative verb. So two quick and kind of dirty examples from Old Persian that I took from Kent and forgot to cite him. In the first, we see the kind of Iranian vicious second position clitic pronoun coding the possessor in the genitive dative case. And in the second, we see a full noun phrase, a proper name in a genitive dative case coding the possessor. Is that okay? Everybody can hear me still? I'm not being... but then we all know Iranian started to lose case. There's basically a disintegration of the system. And this basically causes the genitive dative case to disappear. So there needs to be some sort of innovative mechanism to code possessors if you're going to keep this construction, because you no longer have a dative case or a genitive case to use there. At the same time, the clitic pronouns, the cognates of those clitic pronouns are not only preserved, but are mostly preserved in their roles as marking benefactives and recipients and external possessors as well. So there is a lot of necessary innovation in lexical noun phrases where the clitic pronouns are retained and retain most of their functions. Finally, in many modern Northwest Iranian languages, the clitic pronouns have shifted their position from second position in the clause to closer to their to the verb, basically, and have innovated a lot of functions that were missing in the earlier languages. And all of these affect the possessive constructions. So some quick and three case studies, well, 3.5 if you. So we have Bactrian, which is a Middle Eastern Iranian language, where which have a two-case system, and we have the clitic pronouns where having the same functional range as the Old Persian ones, more or less. Still marking possessors, and we will have the oblique case marking, which is retained on some pronouns at least, marking the possessor. Then we're going to have examples from late Middle Persian, which is my favorite language on earth, where we're going to have clitic pronouns with the same functional range as Middle Persian, more or less. They have some innovative usages which are not of interest for this talk, retained, and they're going to, as the case system was completely lost by then, by late Middle Persian, they have some kind of weird innovative strategies of coding possessors that might point to dialectal differences within late Middle Persian. Finally, we will talk about Sivandi and Talish or Talishi, depends who you are. Some people call it Talish, that's how the speakers I work with originally called it. Where we have several innovative usages of the clitic pronouns that sift into the whole range of predicative possession. So, when we go to Bactrian, we have here two examples from Sims-Williams's nice texts of legal documents, which are a bit repetitive. So we have in the first example 8a, we have the clitic pronoun, it is in bold, the first person plural. Clitic pronoun, which marks the possessor. And the possessed is marked by the khan, it shouldn't have a final N in the transcription, I'm sorry. And the verb be all the way at the end, as you can see, indexes the possessed, the third person singular. In 8b, we have the oblique first person pronoun man, as opposed to as, which still survives in Bactrian. And the verb cross-references the dispute and quarrel and bad words that were held between those two parties of the contract, or not held, actually. So we have two strategies, an oblique case, the oblique case, and the clitic pronoun. The clitic pronoun is still used for recipients and for benefactives. The oblique case is sometimes used for that, sometimes not. It is a bit murky, and some more analysis is needed. So let's move on to Middle Persian, which is my favorite language. Here we have in 9a and 9b the clitic pronoun used to mark the possessor with both past and present tense of the verb be. Given that there is split alignment in Middle Persian, this shows that the role of the clitic pronoun as possessor is not a part of the split alignment system. It's always there. So, and the verb cross-references the possessed, which is a child in both cases. So, as the clitic pronoun, again, he's used a lot for benefactives and recipients and so on in Middle Persian. We can safely assume that this is an instance of Heine's goal schema, or the goal type of predicative possession. One thing that needs to be mentioned about Middle Persian, which is often overlooked, is the fact that the verb is not entirely necessary. So we have many examples, which, if I have to bet, it seems to me from my data that they have some semantically more limited range, but they're just more rare also, where we just don't have the verb. And there is no case of ellipsis. There is no be verb in the immediate vicinity. So here we have a man who catches a wife and a woman and marries her, and then he has rulership over her, which is not the case. So this is actually a pretty common situation where you just don't need the verb in Middle Persian. The vast majority of tokens of predicative possession in Middle Persian has the possessor expressed by the clitic pronoun. This is over 75% in my data. However, the clitic pronoun is just a pronoun. And it's the only relic of the old genitive possessive form. But since it's just a pronoun, how can you express possessors in their first mention? You can't use a pronoun for first mentions. You can't use a pronoun if you want to reintroduce the possessor after you have not been talking about them for quite some time. So those are rare situations, but if you go over Middle Persian texts, you find that different texts use slightly different strategies to cope with these situations. So the first from the Denkard 6 and the Pahlavi Rivayat, the possessor is expressed by just a morphologically unmarked down phrase. So here we have every person, we have the word for a thing followed by an indefinite article, and we have the present tense copula. And we know that this is not the case that every person is a thing, because the following sentence tells us that this is a thing that this person holds dearer and more important than anything else in the world. And this is from the Denkard 6, which is a lot of very small, kind of like advice-like sayings. So there is not a lot of room for continuation. So you'll find actually this all type of expression many times there with different possessed items. Every person has an ocean, every person has a plot of land, and so on and so on. So this is what I call solution 1 in Middle Persian. There is a morphologically unflagged noun phrase coding possessors. It is not the case that this is the way recipients and benefactives and goals are coded in this language. Those are coded usually with an adposition or a postposition ra. There is a retention, so there is a split typology, if you want, between lexical and pronominal possessors in Middle Persian. The second strategy is a bit more like normal, where you have the postposition ra marking that is used to mark benefactors and goals and so on, marking the possessor. So here we have from Davias Namag. Just one example, there are many. And this is congruent with the typology of having a goal type expression of possession. So we have some evidence, at least, of a dialectal, chronolectal, manuscript-lectal variation in Middle Persian, which is pretty cool. Finally, I want to talk a bit about Taleshi and Sivandi. They are both northwestern Iranian languages. This is the data from Daniel Paul's dissertation that is available online. And in Taleshi, we find that possession is marked basically by the clitic pronoun, which is on once by this or by this ra construction. The case of Sivandi is a bit more complicated and a bit cooler because in first glance in 13a it looks the same. You have there once was a king, he had 3 sons. This is the second clause at a story. You have the clitic pronoun attached cliticizing to the possessed item. It kind of looks again like the first example of what you find in Taleshi and many other northwestern Iranian languages. However, here the clitic pronoun is obligatory. It is always there. So you have 13a where you basically have 2 pronouns again. I have a coat. I think it's a coat. I don't know. It's something that you wear. A vest. But the possessor is marked twice. Once by an unflagged noun phrase and once by the clitic pronoun. So, how come this situation arises? If you look at the functions of, or the innovative functions of the clitic pronoun in Sivandi and many other regional languages, it is found expressing transitive subjects or a arguments in the past tense. So, for example, here, he was afraid. You see the clitic pronoun on the last phrase in this case before the verb, on the last noun phrase, coding the a argument or the transitive subject. So what I want to propose for this language at least is that we have a case of analogy between an obligatory clitic pronoun in one case, which is the possessive, and an obligatory clitic pronoun, which is the which is this one, the transitive subject one. So there is a reanalysis of the clitic pronoun in the possession construction from an ad nominal possessor to an argument pronoun, and I follow the work of Jelinek, Mohanan, and later also Bresnan and so on, where they say that where they offer several types of linking rules between a clitic pronoun to a heavy lexical noun phrase, which actually any version of theirs will probably work here if you tweak it a bit. And this reanalysis is basically actualized by the ability to use an unmarked possessor together, a morphologically unmarked possessor, together with the clitic pronoun in the same phrase. So we have 2 innovations. The possessor is treated like past tense a arguments as a result of these 2 innovations. So we can kind of talk about the have drift or the beginning of a have drift in 3 stages. The first we have represented in Taleshi, where we have the lexical possessor flagged by Ra, either flagged by Ra as a lexical noun phrase possessor or the clitic pronouns. We have those 2 options. Then we can say there might have been a stage in between where the clitic pronouns became obligatory, but if you wanted the lexical possessor, you still needed to use this Ra. And at some point, the clitic pronouns were reanalyzed as agreement or indexing markers. This was actualized by those linking rules or whatever device you want to attach to it. And you have the stage 3 that you find in Sivandi and in several other Iranian languages actually as well. So just because I have like a minus 30 seconds. Just to summarize, if we look at this brief typology of possessive, be possessive in Iranian, we see that one daughter, like all the daughters constructions of one mother construction diverge in their typology. In one sense, most of this diversity happened because of the loss of the case system on the one hand and the retention of the clitic pronouns on the other hand. So you retain half of your old strategy, you have to innovate all your lexical mechanisms to express possessors, and you get this variation, and at some point, two usages of the clitic pronouns kind of like clash, and you get a situation like what you find in Sivandi and maybe also in Gorani. This is in brackets because I'm not sure exactly that I'm right about that. And that is it. You can even see those. I think I'm on time.
Thank you. Mr. Shirtz?
It's over. Yes, but I'm ready. No, just keep. Oh, good.
I just have a clarification question. What happens to the verb then?
Because you focused on what happened to the clitic and that it changed and it turned into a subject, right? Like
The
a real
B verb
subject.
is, yeah. You mean the
but
B
what
verb?
happened to the verb? And
The B verb.
Yeah, exactly.
It's remarkably stable.
It's stable. Did it change its maybe like the kinds of aspect and tense markers that it could receive in that process, that it became more like a full verb instead of a copular verb?
So the only place where I think there might be this Hevdrift situation is Sivandi, where there is, you could say that the clitic pronoun is now a part of the verbal syntagm.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But it is still just the B verb. And if you have, and there are many instances, definitely across Indo-Iranian, not only Iranian, where you have new B verbs grammaticalizing in some sort of like different distributional patterns, they go into this as well. I think there is one example there of such a verb in the data that I just showed. So the verb is remarkably stable.
Thank you.
Other question?
I know that the case, it is practically the relation between nouns and the pronouns. At the same time, I heard that today, that practically verbs have the category of case. Am I right?
No, verbs.
No. Because you see that to be usual, according to I have and to be, it is as indicated some cases according to your speech.
So in order to express predicative possession construction with be across Iranian, you need some sort of, in Old Persian you needed the dative case marking the possessor. So it's something like, to me there is a book. In later stages, when you lost the dative case, you innovate some adpositions to express this function. So you still say, to me there is a book, but with a different syntactic mechanism to express this dative-like function.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions? Please.
Very interesting stuff, all this, the historical data. I had a question. You had, I think it was Sivandi data up there, where there was something like tarseshkard,
Yeah.
and there was this clitic on the, I guess, part of the verb. And I was wondering, is it, so in that case it's not marking the object. You're saying it's a subject.
It is not. It is not, yeah. And this case of what people have been calling many names, like complex predicates, complex verbs, here the nominal part of the complex verb with do always gets this clitic. When you have give verbs used in this construction, you have more variation. The clitic can move. There is some reanalysis of a more tightly bound, but this is just how it is. Yeah, and it's definitely not the object.
I have a question. How close is Sivandi to Gilaki and Talish?
So they're all so-called Northwest Iranian.
Caucasus mostly? Or?
No, I think it's Central Plateau languages.
Okay.
But to be honest, we are, I think, in desperate need of a good phylogeny of Northwest Iranian languages, because there is this book, like some papers by Ludwig Paul and Agnes Korn, but we need a good phylogeny.
Is it in northwest Iran? You
It's
said which areas, regions?
Sivand.
Okay.
I need to look it up, but
All right.
it's a small
Thank you.
village.
Question you have?
A couple quick comments.
Please.
One is that in classical Persian,
we also find these raw cases, like, you know, for possession, like ura dokhtari bud, you know, things like that. I'm sure you would agree. And also similar to this, we have some remnants of something somebody might call an ergative pattern, basically, like in Persian for cold, being feeling cold or feeling hot, sardam ast, right? So you have the be and the same, but you drop the pronoun. I mean, we're an all subject language, so you can say man sardame, or you can say sardame.
Yeah, this is actually how you say I'm called in Sivandi. I have man kheli sardam.
So yeah, I mean, these are interesting patterns. I think these are also interesting for the previous speaker. I think the fact that we have these patterns in.
Here we go, sir.
So if I've understood correctly, in the most innovative cases, the language is moving toward a transitive construction, but of course possessive have in English or Western European languages is notoriously not very transitive, right? So a car is had by John, for example, you can't say. I mean, I'm wondering how you're understanding transitive and what degree of transitivity is actually emerging.
Yeah, so if you go by, for example, the transitive hierarchy, if I'm understanding correctly, the Hopper and Thompson, so those are definitely going to end up kind of low in the transitivity hierarchy. At the same time, when you look at the surface syntax of those constructions with have or dashtan, they actually share so much with prototypical transitive verb like kill or beat up or things like that. Sorry. That it looks like there is some sort of a transitive expansion. It was recently mentioned in this Valpal project that they had in Leipzig that different languages show this like basic transitive construction expanding to different degrees. So here we have again the situation of a very always animate, very important actor, the possessor, that needs to be somehow highlighted, and the way to highlight it is by saying that this is a transitive, give it more and more transitive subject properties. At the same time, the object is not really affected by the possession, so this is why maybe the have drift is so slow.
Could you say like the table has 3 legs?
So in my data, I don't think I have many inanimates in this construction. Most of those languages have borrowed the dashtan construction from Persian. Most of them have done that, and they can use maybe this for this type, but not with B. With B, I find mostly animate or divine possessors.
Other questions? So then let us thank the gentleman for his